Hey everyone, welcome back to I Dare You Sleep. I know a lot of you love to fall asleep to these creepy stories, but before you do, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from around the world. And if you're enjoying the thrills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and see if you can make it through without losing any sleep.
When thinking about the winter days in Arizona, I can't forget the annual visits to Aunt Samantha and Uncle Alex's house. They live in a secluded area near the outskirts of Prescott, a city famous for its wild hills and beautiful natural scenery. For many years now, around December, we would usually visit them on weekends, meeting up with family and escaping the harsh winter cold of our hometown in Colorado. This tradition has lasted for many years, since they moved there almost 12 years ago, and I can say that I've gotten used to it since I was very young. I'm 14 years old now, and the story I'm about to tell happened 2 years ago, when I had just turned 12. Aunt Samantha has a daughter named Sarah, who is 1 year older than me. Every time I visited, Sarah would be there, and we often went out together. Even though Sarah is a girl, she always shared my interests, from hiking and exploring nature to engaging in quirky mischief. She was always ready to join in any adventure I came up with. During that visit, after dinner, our family sat down to watch a horror movie, as we always did. When the movie ended, my parents and my aunt and uncle stayed in the kitchen, drinking wine and chatting away. That night, Sarah told me about a rumor in the area. A giant jaguar had appeared near Connor Lake, which was only about a 15-minute walk from their house. The locals kept reporting sightings of this large creature, and even the frightening sounds it made at night. Sarah, with her adventurous nature, wanted to take me to see if we could catch a glimpse of the animal. I knew we were just two kids, aged 12 and 13, and going out at this hour was strictly forbidden. However, Sarah was incredibly persuasive. With just a few words, I was drawn into her plan. We decided to sneak out of the house while our parents were busy talking, using the back door to avoid being caught. On our way, we stopped by a small convenience store to buy some snacks. The old cashier at the store gave us a wary look and said, "You two should be careful. It's late already." He didn't explain why, but that warning alone made me feel a bit uneasy. The streets were completely empty, not a single soul around, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. We walked for about 10 minutes toward Connor Lake. The pavement gradually became damp, and on both sides of the road there were more signs of small marshy areas. Everything around us was shrouded in darkness, with only the faint light from distant street lamps. I started to feel a chill creeping through my skin, not just from the cold air, but from the eerie atmosphere. Suddenly, Sarah stopped right in front of me. She pointed straight ahead and whispered, "Look, what is that person doing?" I looked in the direction Sarah pointed and immediately saw what she meant. Far down the road, under the dim light of a street lamp, was the figure of a man. He stood still, unmoving, seemingly not making any gestures. If he had been walking or doing something, it wouldn't have been so frightening. But the fact that he stood there, staring straight ahead in silence, sent shivers down my spine. "Should we turn back?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "No, this is the only way to the lake, unless you want to wade through the marsh or climb over those fences," Sarah replied, her voice slightly anxious but still firm. We continued walking, but our steps were slower and more cautious. When we were about halfway to the man, he suddenly turned around. The strange thing was that he didn't just turn his head, but his entire body, in a sudden mechanical-like motion. He faced us without blinking. Sarah and I stopped. For a moment, we couldn't move, as if frozen by his gaze. Then he raised his arm, not in a gentle wave, but with a forceful motion, as if signaling us to come closer. Sarah grabbed my hand, and we both started running back in the direction we came from. My heart was pounding, and I could hear Sarah's heavy breathing as we tried to escape from there. We kept running until we had to stop to catch our breath under a large tree next to an abandoned house. Sarah turned to me, her face pale. There are many strange people around here. Now I understand why my parents don't let me go out at this hour. Just then, I saw a familiar figure. The man, somehow, had appeared at the end of the road again, still standing motionless. This time, he was under the streetlight, and I could see his face more clearly. He looked about 50 years old, with messy hair and a large scar running across his face. The way he smiled sent chills down my spine. A toothless smile, just tightly pressed lips. Then suddenly he started running toward us. Sarah screamed, pulling me up, and we ran again, this time without stopping. We dashed through yards, climbed over fences, and somehow we eventually made it back to the house. The back door was locked, so we had to knock in a panic. When our parents opened the door, Sarah simply said we had gone to the convenience store to buy snacks. They just lightly scolded us, reminding us not to go out at that time again. But I couldn't forget the man's face under the streetlight, and the fear that followed me for a long time after. That night, my two friends, Jake and Sam, and I decided to have one last memorable night before the new school year began. We didn't want the summer to end on a boring note, so the three of us planned a small adventure, sneaking out late at night. We lived in a small, secluded town in the northern mountains, where everything was quiet and uneventful, but that stillness made it all the more thrilling and a bit nerve-wracking. Around midnight, when the whole town was fast asleep, we quietly left the house and began walking toward the local high school. The night was pitch black, and the moon's faint glow barely lit the narrow road. As we walked, we chatted and laughed about all the silly things that had happened over the summer. At one point, Jake even yelled out, his voice echoing in the stillness of the night, which made us laugh out loud like a bunch of fools. Yet, deep down, we all felt a slight unease. Our town was so empty that not a single car passed by, and the silence made every little sound feel eerie. After about 20 minutes of walking, we reached the school. During the day, it was nothing special, but at night, it looked strange and unsettling. We lay down on the artificial grass field, gazing up at the starry sky. It was so quiet that we could hear each other's breathing, but the peacefulness of it helped us relax. We talked about everything under the stars, from stupid jokes to our dreams for the future. Time flew by, and when the clock neared 1 a.m., we decided it was time to head back home. On our way back, as we neared the familiar T-junction, a crossroads well known in the town, we suddenly saw the headlights of a car idling at the stop sign. It was an old car, sitting eerily in the shadows with only its headlights cutting through the dark. At first, we didn't think much of it and continued walking. However, the closer we got, the more I sensed something was off. The car had been sitting there for too long, almost like it was waiting for someone. As we approached the intersection, the car slowly began to move, turning in our direction and creeping toward us. It was an old white Mustang, dirty and battered, as if it had seen better days. Sam chuckled and yelled out a stupid joke about the car, but just as he finished, the car suddenly stopped, its headlights glaring straight at us, making my heart skip a beat. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, the car spun around quickly and started speeding toward us. Without thinking, I shouted, "Run!" Instantly, all three of us took off, the sound of our footsteps pounding against the asphalt. I could hear the tires screeching behind us as the car chased us down the road. Ahead, there was a small path leading into the woods, and with no other options, we bolted into it. I dove through the thick trees, disappearing into the shadows, my heart racing and my breath ragged. Jake and Sam managed to hide in the bushes just a few meters away from me. From a distance, I could still hear the engine of the Mustang idling, slowly moving along the road as if searching for us. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped. I heard the car doors open and the heavy thud of footsteps hitting the ground. Two large men stepped out, and one of them was holding a long metal pipe. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, but my heart was beating so fast and hard that I was terrified they could hear it. The man with the pipe started walking toward the trees, his eyes scanning the area as if trying to find us. I quietly covered my mouth, trying to control my breathing. The dense air of the forest made everything feel even more suffocating. The man shouted threats at us. "You think you can hide? Come out now, or I'll drag each of you out of there." I could feel their eyes sweeping past my hiding spot. At that moment, I realized if they took just a few more steps, they'd definitely see us. The second man, growing impatient, turned around and grumbled, "Let's just leave. It's not worth it. They're just kids. Come on, we've got other things to do." After a brief hesitation, the man with the pipe turned back and walked toward the car. Both climbed back in, and the Mustang roared to life, speeding off down the road toward the next town. We stayed hidden in the woods for a few more minutes, making sure the car was really gone. No one spoke. Only the sound of our heavy breathing filled the dark. When we were sure they weren't coming back, we cautiously stepped out of the forest and sprinted straight home. None of us said a word, but the weight of what had just happened lingered heavily in the air. We tried to laugh it off, but deep inside, we all knew that night was far from a joke. 2 days later, the news broke that a white Mustang had been stolen and was involved in a robbery in the neighboring town on the exact night we were chased. Hearing it sent a cold shiver down my spine. We couldn't even imagine what could have happened if those men had decided to search deeper into the woods that night. When I was 17, I had strict rules about staying out late, especially on weekends. My parents would never let me stay out past midnight, but my best friend, Marcus, had no such curfew. It was a foggy Friday night in October 2015, the kind of night that feels uneasy. My parents were sound asleep, and Marcus texted me with an idea that made my heart race. He wanted to explore the old asylum on the outskirts of town, Greywood Asylum. The place had been abandoned for over 2 decades, but strange stories about it still floated around. Feeling reckless and determined not to back out, I quietly slipped out of my room, careful not to make a sound. I snuck down the stairs, each creak of the old wood beneath my feet sending a wave of panic through me. I grabbed my bike from the backyard and pedaled hard into the night, heading towards Marcus's place. 10 minutes later, we met up at the edge of the woods near the asylum. The air was colder here, and the fog was thicker. The old brick building stood like a dark monolith in the distance, silhouetted by the faint moonlight, its windows like hollow eyes watching us approach. The front gates were rusted shut, but the fence wasn't too high. We tossed our bikes into the bushes and climbed over, landing in dead, overgrown grass. Marcus flashed a grin, but there was a nervousness behind it. "Let's find a way in," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We circled the perimeter until we found a cracked basement window. The glass had long been shattered, and Marcus, always the braver one, went in first. I shone my flashlight through the window, the beam barely cutting through the thick, suffocating darkness. The basement reeked of mold and decay. I could feel the chill seeping up from the earth beneath my feet as I followed him inside. Once we were both in, the sound of our footsteps echoed in the emptiness. The basement was eerily quiet, except for the soft hum of something. Maybe the wind, maybe something else. The walls were covered in graffiti, and old rusted pipes lined the ceiling. We moved through the narrow, low-ceilinged corridors, avoiding debris and puddles of water. At the far end of the basement, we found a stairwell leading up. The door at the top of the stairs was barely hanging on its hinges, rusted and rotten. We stepped through, entering what seemed to be the main floor. That's when I noticed something unsettling. The lights, flickering, dim, and in no particular pattern, a few overhead lights were still on, casting long, sinister shadows. It didn't make sense for the electricity to still be running in an abandoned building. "It feels like someone's still here," Marcus muttered. He wasn't wrong. We moved cautiously down the hallway, the decaying smell growing stronger. The walls were peeling, and every room we passed seemed like a ghost of its former self. Empty beds, overturned wheelchairs, shattered glass. But there was a heaviness in the air, something oppressive that made it hard to breathe. As we reached the end of the hall, there was one door that stood out, closed and locked. Odd, considering all the other doors were either broken or hanging open. Marcus gave it a push, but it didn't budge. "Why would this door be locked?" I asked, my voice shaking. Marcus stepped back, a thoughtful look on his face. "Asylum rooms didn't have locks. That means something is blocking it from the other side." A shiver ran down my spine. We heard a faint sound, almost like a muffled knock or a soft thud from behind the door. Then silence. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "I don't like this," I whispered, but Marcus was already moving to the adjacent room, the door of which was wide open. Inside, the walls were filled with strange, tiny holes, like someone had drilled through them. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to one hole that was just big enough to peek through. I dropped to my knees and put my eye to the hole. The room on the other side was pitch black. I squinted, trying to make out anything in the darkness, when suddenly my eyes adjusted. A figure, a woman, was standing in the corner, her back to me, wearing a long, ragged hospital gown. Her hair was matted and filthy, hanging limply down her back. I gasped, nearly falling back, and whispered urgently, "Marcus, there's someone in there." He didn't believe me at first, but when he looked through the hole, he froze. "Holy shit," he breathed, his voice trembling. "What do we do?" I asked, feeling panic claw at my chest. Before Marcus could answer, we heard the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor from inside the locked room. It was coming towards the door. Marcus grabbed my arm, ready to bolt. But I made the mistake of looking through the hole one more time. She was gone. The woman who had been standing in the corner was now missing. My heart skipped a beat. Then I felt it, the sensation of someone watching me. Slowly, I shifted my eye to the hole again. She was there, right at the hole, her face inches from mine, staring at me through the tiny opening, a twisted grin spreading across her gaunt, pale face. I screamed and fell backward, scrambling to my feet. "Run!" Marcus shouted, already halfway to the basement stairs. We ran faster than I ever thought possible, my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand as we tore down the stairs and through the basement. I could feel her behind me. I didn't dare look back, but the sensation was undeniable. Something was right on my heels, chasing us. Marcus dove through the basement window first, and I followed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pull myself up. I was certain that any second she would grab my legs, and yank me back into the darkness. When we were finally outside, we didn't stop. We ran for our bikes, pedaling as fast as we could back to town. Neither of us spoke. We didn't laugh or joke about it afterward. It wasn't funny. It was terrifying. I haven't been back to Greywood Asylum since, and I don't plan on it. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know it wasn't human. Whether it was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely, I don't care to find out. All I know is, some things are better left alone.